It just says that in AI, it's not easy. It's not as easy as technology startups in the past, because in AI, it requires a lot of investment.
What broke the internet after that release was a PhD student in astrophysics, I think. From the entire PhD, GPT-401 figured out the methods and the experiments, and reproduced that in a few hours.
I think we need to be careful to foreground that, yes, as legislators, we are looking to make it safe and responsible, but we are also cognizant of investment and venture capital and the needs of investors and stakeholders, and they're not always big business.
Hello and welcome to the Common Factor series. I'm here with a couple of generative AI experts. Thank you so much for joining me today on this Common Factor episode. I'm really looking forward to having our chat. We've obviously met before and we've talked about some of your experiences and why you got into this field in the first place. But Daswin, I want to start with you, and I guess if you can turn back the clock a little bit, how did you find yourself researching AI? Talk us through that.
Thanks, Maddie. So for me, it was the simple joy of solving a problem using an algorithm. And this was just using automation, so a programmatic approach to solving a problem. So simple examples like searching through a set of numbers to find a specific digit, or filtering through a set of numbers. Some early examples are things like the Fibonacci sequence. I did also have a ranking in competitive programming, so that was the start. And then gradually I shifted towards, so can we build algorithms that are smarter at certain tasks, and also the specific property of being non-deterministic. So we don't give a specific instruction, but we allow the algorithm to learn from past data. So you're basically learning a function, and this is what we call machine learning, or mostly artificial intelligence these days. So that was a start, and then a PhD in AI, where I built a new algorithm for incremental learning. So this is way before generative AI. That led to a short stint in industry, working with a startup for building out small AI, so more energy efficient methods, so using less data to learn better, and then into academia and in AI research and teaching and so on.
Fantastic. And it's such an interesting place to be. You mentioned that obviously ML has been around for quite some time. We're now talking a lot more around artificial intelligence. And Babak, I would love if you could share a little bit about your role as head of business analytics and how you've been exploring the concept of responsible AI as well.
Oh yeah, thank you. So as a head of department, in my department, we have different expertise all the way from technical, quantitative side of data modeling, AI, machine learning. There's a lot of interest in terms of how we get the technology, the algorithm to do better, to do more. As Daswin mentioned, there's a lot of excitement around that. We also have expertise in the qualitative side, in understanding and exploring people and organizational related implications of that. So personally, when I look at technology, and if you go back to 20, 30, 40 years ago, there's always excitement in terms of what technology can do, the new things that technology can achieve, the innovation side, the performance, productivity side. There's always a lot of excitement in that space, both in academia and in profession. But then there's a question in terms of what can go wrong, and probably some call it dark side, but generally what can go wrong and in what way we can manage that. So that's what interests me, finding the right balance, and that there's this excitement, but then being conscious of what can go wrong, and finding the right balance so you don't focus too much on one side, and so you make sure that you take advantage of the opportunities with technology, but at the same time you put the right guidelines, guardrails, education, culture in place, so that you manage unintended and sometimes intended wrongdoings there.
Yeah, some fantastic points there, and we're going to delve into that a little bit more just as we continue the chat. But Niloufer, I'd like to talk about your role now. If we can talk through your role as the co-director of Data Horizons Research Centre and your work with AI regulation. Tell me a little bit more about that and how you got into it.
Thank you very much, Maddie. Yes, so at Data Horizons, we research a variety of AI-related issues, including AI regulation. And since the 2019 ethics framework has been released, we've had endless discussions on AI ethics. And now the challenge is to transition to legally enforceable binding AI regulations. And the government's September 2024 proposal on mandatory guardrails is a really good start. So essentially it sets out 10 mandatory guardrails. It requires institutions, if they're using high risk or AI in high risk settings, to establish a risk management process for identifying and mitigating risk, also a accountability framework in order to make sure we comply with regulation, and also importantly a means of contesting those very uncertain, opaque AI decisions. And the first step is probably to see how all of this interacts and aligns with existing laws, because contrary to a lot of popular discourse, we are not in a dystopian lawless area. We have a lot of non-AI specific laws that actually apply to AI, like administrative laws, consumer laws, corporations laws, and so on.
Privacy Act.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So how do we align these to the new AI guardrails? And so there's a variety of options, and the challenge is to make sure that, as Babak said, we have support of innovation while also having the necessary level of commercial certainty, support for investment and venture capital, and also regulation that's logistically feasible, because lawyers can, draft this brand new world of AI regulation, which the computer scientists say, well, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
So it has to be economically feasible and also commercially and logistically feasible.
We were talking about innovation before coming into the chat today, and also not stifling innovation. I think that's super important to understand here. But Daswin, when we talk about advancing AI, there's often a focus on creating better forms of AI. I mean, what kind of characteristics or improvements do you think will define the next generation of AI technologies?
Yes, so there's a significant disparity between what we call artificial intelligence and human intelligence. So, simple example, it needs 1 billion data points to produce something meaningful. Compared to a human where maybe 5 or 10 examples are sufficient for us to generalize, summarize the information or draw conclusions, inference, and so on. So how the machines achieve this intelligence that we see has a significant cost involved in terms of data, computing, and also annotation. So how the large language models become conversational agents is through human-informed reinforcement learning. And that's a lot of data annotation. So there's significant costs involved. And I might touch on how recently OpenAI has been valued at $150 billion. But they're also burning through cash. So they're going to spend about $50 billion until they start churning out a profit. But everyone's on board, obviously. Everyone's investing into AI. And in addition to that, NVIDIA is in the $1 trillion market. So there's only 2 other companies there, Apple and Microsoft. There's still huge gaps between what we call machine intelligence and human intelligence. And fundamentally, that's to do with higher order cognition. So functions like reasoning, inferencing, planning, even memory, these are not exhibited by the techniques used to build the large language models. If you think of how we use GenAI, we do a lot of summarization, brainstorming, aggregation of information, creative content generation. So that's really good, and there's significant progress there. But in terms of better forms, I think the next frontier is when we start cracking into higher order cognition functions, not in the same way that humans perform the same task. So for example, GPT-4o1 recently released has some capability of reasoning. But this reasoning really is chain of thought prompting. So underneath the reasoning capability, there's a large number of prompts being sent to the model, almost like an auto prompting. So it creates multiple agents, and they try to distinguish or determine what information is relevant to the query being sent, which you're also being charged for. So you have to pay for all the other prompts, the shadow prompts that are being executed. But it still manifests as reasonings. So we have multiple prompts underneath the hood, but the outcome is some form of reasoning. So it's dissimilar to human reasoning, but it still achieves certain benchmarks. So what broke the internet after that release was a PhD student in astrophysics, I think. From the entire PhD, GPT-4o1 figured out the methods and the experiments and reproduced that in a few hours compared to what the student spent doing for more than a year. So that's a significant achievement, but that was an edge case. We didn't see many other PhD students come up with similar stories. But it's not too far to go when we see that happening, where at scale we see not just the standard GenAI capabilities, but also reasoning coming into the forefront.
Yeah, Daswin, I think it's really interesting that we've spoken about how AI actually can reason, and we talk about data-driven decision-making, but it might be AI-driven decision-making in the future in some of our industries as well. I'm really excited to talk about that a little bit more. But Babak, I'm going to go back to you, and I know you and Niloufer are actually collaborating on responsible AI research. So what are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered when looking at AI innovation and balancing that with ethical considerations and legal considerations? Maybe Babak, if you want to start.
Some of the challenges. There are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of opportunities. Going back to the whole idea of innovate with care. So there's a lot of opportunities. As Daswin mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of money going there. In fact, what's happening is most of money is going to the innovation side. And what it means is that in the AI sector, and if you take a step back, go back like to 20, 30 years ago, we used to have this discussion of digital divide. And 30 years ago, digital divide was really about whether you have access to the internet. And different countries had different level of access. Within one country, regional areas, city areas, they had different level of access, which meant that you had different level of access to digital services. And this created divide, right? So that was digital divide at the time. But now what's happening is that we are moving towards a big AI divide. As Daswin mentioned, a lot of these investments are focused in certain countries, one or two countries, US one, China, etc. And then the rest of the world are users of that system, which means that within even a particular country, we have particular companies. And AI is such a resource demanded system that it requires a lot of energy, a lot of hardware, software, infrastructure in place. So having said all this, a lot of money is going to developing better AI, better systems, more powerful systems. We've had recent announcements from Microsoft, Amazon, Google that they're going to invest a lot of money on nuclear energy because, in the next 20, 30 years, they're going to need a lot of energy. And then compare that with the type of conversations we have in Australia about energy and the future of energy. So everything is very much interconnected. So this sets a little bit of background that when we think about AI and responsible AI, this AI part and the innovation part of it is growing real fast. And it's actually growing in a way that few organizations, companies, and governments have a bigger part and bigger role in that. So then the other side is care side, the responsible side. And what's happening in that side is just finding a way that you, as Niloufer mentioned, setting the right guardrails and guidelines, ethical frameworks and principles in place, and working with organizations and with also members of the society to find the right mechanism, culture in place so that you can take advantage of AI properly. And if I could just use an example, think about smoking cigarettes. Think about alcohol, maybe alcohol, right? Social media. Social media 10, 20 years ago was not a big issue like it is today. That in Australia, we're thinking about banning it for certain age or not, in what way we do this. Mobile phones in schools, so we have these conversations. So with technology, it's always like that, the innovation side is bigger, then you have the responsible side, and you think about, you normally wait and see some of the big things that go wrong. And in AI, we've had some, but we probably will have some bigger ones and bigger use cases soon. And those cases, and Niloufer can probably say more about that, that when you have cases like that, is that big regulations come into play. And we've seen that in cybersecurity. So going back to the example of alcohol, we have age limitations, we have education in place, we have education starts from our schools all the way up. And so with AI is responsible AI in an ideal world, when I think about that, it needs to help organizations take leadership, take advantage of these opportunities, yet be conscious about what goes wrong and what could be the risk. And right now, when we think about risk, and it's also acknowledged by the government's new discussion paper released on responsible AI, that the low-risk AI is no problem. The low-risk AI is an AI that's transparent. You can see how the model and the system operates. So you can engage with it. You can have conversation. It can explain itself. And you can see why a particular, my loan was or was not approved. Whereas the question is about the high-risk AI, when it becomes opaque and when you don't really see what's inside. So responsible AI is trying to make that side more transparent and explainable and bring it into accountability.
Yeah, fantastic. Niloufer, I guess I'd love to hear your perspective on responsible AI and maybe what Babak's explained to us as well. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, so when you mentioned challenges, I think there's a spectrum of challenges, but one which I find particularly interesting, I think is really important, is how we provide meaningful human oversight over AI decisions and applications. And this is one of the proposed mandatory guidelines by the September 2024 federal government paper. But it's an elegant concept. It's a wonderful principle. But the challenge is how we make it operate in practice. And given the ubiquitous nature of AI and its opaque nature, it's embedded within systems, not always transparent, the question is how we provide meaningful human oversight. And if I could give an example relating, Maddie, to what you talked about, automated decision makings. So let's say we've got an institution who uses generative AI to make certain decisions. Let's say it is loan applications, assessment of loan applications. And the question is, where do you impose human oversights, if at all? And how is it possible in the system? And in terms of administrative law, existing law, in making such decisions, systems have to take into account relevant factors and not take into account irrelevant factors. And this becomes a challenge in the AI system, in the sort of landscape where you've got training data sets and there can be hallucinations. Where do you find the human oversight? And when you think of all the different AI applications and all the different AI laws, it becomes quite a challenge. And in the September 2024 paper, the government proposes 3 different ways of approaching it. One is domain-specific approach, where we go to each little piece of legislation and make sure it all works and change the bits of legislation. A second approach is what's called the whole economy approach, which is essentially a whole economy AI Act. And interesting, already we have divergences of interest and opinion. So the tech companies, and this is a little bit of a generalization, are preferring the whole economy holistic approach, whereas some of the human rights organizations and peak bodies are very keen that we have very specific provisions in all our legislation. So human oversight, I think, as we go forward and AI systems become even more sophisticated and move closer to replicating human intelligence, it's the role of the human mind in overseeing. How do we do it? To what extent? In what situations? And as Babak says, we are focused on those high-risk situations where someone might apply for a job and an AI system has discriminated some sort of algorithmic bias, or someone has applied for a loan and they will suffer financial loss if that's wrong. So there are big implications from these automated systems. So I think human oversight to me is one of those critical challenges.
Yeah, and we often hear about, keeping the human in the loop as well. And I've heard that time and time again at a lot of our events and a lot of our panel discussions as well. I want to talk a little bit around the future of AI innovation in Australia and start with Daswin as well. Because Daswin, we've spoken about how we've got quite a bit of red tape in Australia too. So within Australian industries and businesses, what's missing and how do we address these gaps to really promote innovation still in Australia and allow us to move forward? And this is an exciting technology, but within a certain frameworks and guardrails as well. Just love to hear your perspective.
Yes, so innovation in most of the white-collar jobs is gradually happening locally in Australia. But Trobe is still following an example set by the US and European counterparts. So it starts with potentially the automation or the augmentation of office work or workflows, where we try to tap into individual employee productivity. So in some sense, what you have to do is one approach really, is to purchase AI assistant or co-pilot licenses en masse, and then release it to your staff. So your staff become your major research and development arm of your AI effort or AI strategy. And that starts with AI literacy, a framework for responsible adoption, guidelines, a governance structure, and so on. Because until GenAI, what we now call old school AI, good old fashioned AI, was where there was significant investment in building the systems, so your Salesforce, your ERP, and your data warehouses, data lakes. So that's a multi-year, many dollars costing exercise to build the infrastructure. So technology infrastructure, data infrastructure, and then you build the AI applications. So this is, well, it's still feasible to do this. Then there is good value, especially for large organizations where there is lots of high quality data that can be centralized in a data warehouse or data lake. But the new kid on the block is GenAI, where you're actually using external data. You're not really bothered about technology infrastructure, data infrastructure. You just bring the model in, and then you try to innovate directly with your employees. So grassroots, from the operational staff to middle managers all the way to the top, you try to provide AI assistance and let them figure out how to improve their productivity in their roles. So this, obviously, on the flip side, it leads to job displacement. There's going to be some impact on current job descriptions and positions. But hopefully, organizational leaders are responsible in how they introduce AI, and there's retraining and the potential of new types of jobs explored within organizations, especially large organizations. Also, in addition to that immediate innovation, there's also potential in what I've described as in some of my articles as a prompting library. So when GenAI models are provided to us, the organizations, the AI companies providing these models want you to prompt more frequently and at scale. So the more prompting you do, the more money they make. So if you flip this and you try to slow down the prompting and you introduce an intermediate layer in the organization, it could be a prompt library or a prompt repository where all the staff, all the prompts generated by staff, when they're thinking about a business problem, so either sales or marketing, accounting, human resource, it's captured in the middle layer, obviously with the safeguards and the governance structure. And that opens up a bit of a window for the leaders of the organization to understand where there is strengths and weaknesses inside the organization. So, for example, a certain department is not prompting so much. Maybe they're perfected their processes or they're lagging behind. And then you might have your champion prompters who are prompting 100 times per day. And that knowledge can propagate to your weak spots where there's some AI literacy skills training to be done. So not many organizations are thinking about prompting this way because the models don't afford this. And it's a subscription model, obviously, and you can't really slow down. But if you have the right technology infrastructure in between the two layers, then this is an opportunity to further innovate. And then thirdly, I think once you understand, once you've built a fairly large database of prompts, you start to understand the organization in terms of tasks. So this is a distinction explored in the early days of GPT, where a job description was broken down into tasks. And this is tasks at an hourly basis. So if you think of a job description advertised online, you would have roles and responsibilities, maybe 5 or 6. But what we can do with GenAI is unpack those roles and responsibilities into task level. So in the first hour of my working day, I write 10 emails, I organize 5 meetings. So how much of that can be supported, augmented, automated using GenAI? And that helps you to sort of reinvent the entire value chain across the organization. So I think that's where where organizations can cash in significantly on GenAI. Last point, I think no one's really figured out the secret sauce, the playbook for this. But at some point, an organization will figure this out, and then it becomes a template for all the other organizations to replicate en masse.
Yeah.
And that's when you start seeing more multi-agent systems coming into operation.
And we often talk about, I guess, having that twin or that digital twin as well. And I know there's certain areas even of my job where I'm like, I would love to be able to automate that and have my AI assistant do that so I can do more meaningful work. So we do hear about those use cases and some fantastic opportunities for industry to look at as well. But Niloufer, I'd like to look at, again, AI regulations, and maybe if you could expand on how the shift towards more stringent AI regulations might affect innovation as well, and especially when it comes to venture capital. I know you've mentioned that to me before, if you can talk us through that.
Yes, it's a really interesting point. So commercial certainty is really important in terms of supporting innovation and investment. So you want commercial certainty as to when the law applies and also how the law applies. And at present, we have a little bit of uncertainty in that area around the EU's Act and even the proposed Australian guardrails. And one of those areas is how we define high risk. So at the moment, high risk is defined by reference to somewhat nebulous principles. So for example, in the September 2024 report, they describe high-risk AI settings as ones which can impact on the mental, physical health or safety of an individual, and I quote, can impact on the Australian economy, society, environment and the rule of law.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that is quite broadly framed, and that is quite similar to the EU situation. So in terms of industry, this creates a bit of angst. Is my AI use high risk? Of course, there'll be some very clear cases, but there is that grey area. And secondly, if it is high risk, is what I'm doing sufficient? Because, those requirements I mentioned about accountability for regulatory compliance and the need to mitigate risk, those are quite onerous obligations. So we really need to try and have a framework which supports commercial certainty. But the mix is that you can have commercial certainty with really precise laws, but that doesn't support flexibility. So there's this balance between flexibility and also certainty. And there is some anecdotal, I think the Wall Street Journal and some sort of media sources have reported that there is a flow of venture capital out of the European Union as a consequence of the EU Act, and that the US is actually attracting much more because they have certain legislative certainty and they don't have the reform discourse, because the reform discourse, not even the laws, can be unsettling for investors. And so Australia has a reform discourse. I think we need to be careful to foreground that, yes, as legislators, we are looking to make it safe and responsible, but we are also cognizant of investment and venture capital and the needs of investors and stakeholders, and they're not always big business. Could be small, medium investors. They also need to be in the mix of considerations.
Yeah, some fantastic points there, and you make such a great key point around innovation here in Australia, and just the fact that there isn't a lot to play with here because of how stringent our regulations are. But Babak, you mentioned previously innovation with care as well as a guiding principle in your work. I mean, I'd love if you could maybe expand on that, and how does an industry strike a balance between fostering that innovation but then adhering to the ethical guidelines that they set as well?
In answering that, if I could just build on what Niloufer mentioned, getting the right balance is very important in terms of regulations. Also another thing, going back to Australia's history of supporting technology startups and organizations. We don't have at the moment any large AI listed company in Australia. We do have a number of large technology companies. We have some startups and advanced startups in AI listed in the ASX, but we don't have any large organization. And what does it say? It just says that in AI, it's not easy. It's not as easy as technology startups in the past, because in AI, it requires a lot of investment. You need to have the infrastructure in place, and it requires a lot of money. Now, the government doesn't necessarily need to provide the money, but they do need to provide the platform, a culture, and the right set of regulations, certainty for investors. So I think this is important. This culture and this understanding is important, because this is a long game. This is a long game, and we need, as a country, we need to come together, investing in universities to do research on these topics, and helping and supporting organizations and investors is critical. And of course, getting the right balance when we regulate that. So having this as the underlying infrastructure, cultural infrastructure, then organizations need to feel comfortable taking a little bit of risk, because this is sort of a gray area. And what's happening, if you talk to major consulting firms in this country right now about the key conversations they have with organizations, the key use cases they have for AI and GenAI projects, a lot of it is around responsible AI, ethics of AI, frameworks, which is really good conversations. But it also shows that organizations start with, and boards and, CEOs are very much aware of risk and making sure that they manage risk. So I think this is good, but we need to have equal focus on innovation, innovative ideas, taking risk. So reflecting on our research and also reflecting on some of our recent projects, I think these two need to go hand in hand. We all are learning, the government is learning, the whole world is learning. So having some overarching high-level principles as responsible AI principles and guidelines is important, that is connected to the current conversations and ethical principles that's been produced by the federal government. So having that overarching framework is important. It sets the culture right. It makes sure that the senior executives are on board and fully aware of the key principles, and then having that in place, then you need to think about areas of risks and how much risk you're comfortable to take. So maybe in our recent work, we have 3 levels of risk: high risk, low risk, which is also defined by the government, and also medium risk. Maybe playing a little bit more in the medium side, because the low risk is probably, the risk is very manageable. The system is transparent. We have a lot of use cases that's internationally been tested, and it's good to take advantage of AI there in all areas and sectors. The high risk is probably something that not all organizations want to take risk and lead that area. The medium risk and the medium side is where I would encourage organizations to start investing, because when you do, you set the culture right. With that comes AI literacy throughout the organization. With that comes a lot of capabilities in organizations. We educate our kids. It starts from schools. So there's a lot of focus right now in education. We educate and empower our teachers in schools, our doctors, lawyers, practitioners, nurses, etc., everyone. And then, so you get that right. You get the infrastructure of education right, the culture right, and you support organizations to take a little bit of risk. With this comes, sometimes things may go wrong. You learn from that. So my suggestion for organizations is really don't wait. Don't wait for too long. It may be late. Depending on organizations, if you're in a sector, you probably won't be comfortable to taking, leadership in high risk AI. The medium side, the one in the middle would be the way to go.
And I love the point. There was someone that I spoke to actually at one of these studios episodes that we did, and it was around, I guess, a lot of organisations ask, oh, why should I be implementing AI? Where's the case? Let's answer the why. But I also think sometimes they've got these great systems, which are old legacy systems, and they're working fine. So they think that it's going to be fine. But often what happens is if you ignore that, then they end up being behind. So I think you make a great point there. And Daswin, just to go back to you, you've spoken about augmented innovation in your work before. I mean, if you could elaborate a little bit on what augmented innovation means and it entails and how AI is driving this concept forward. Talk me through that.
Yeah, sure. I might add a couple of points to responsible AI and the importance of, well, especially, I think Australia is at a sovereign AI risk because we don't have foundational model capacity. And that's significant. So potentially the government, organizations and universities can come together to build this capability within the country. So a bit of an island mentality where we are risk averse. There isn't really a startup culture. So for example, as I said earlier, investors are flocking to OpenAI even when they know that 2/3 of their investment will be burnt off before they start making a profit. So that is the sort of cutthroat corporate American culture. But also it's a very competitive space. So the flip side to responsible AI is that potentially we're all responsible until we get punched in the face, for example, where we have many state actors competing for AI dominance. And we see this in the corporate setting where all the corporate drama at OpenAI, so Sam is in, Sam is out, that shows itself where OpenAI is really trying hard to be at the top. The same goes for countries, and that's one reason why a lot of the AI legislation floating around excludes national security and military use of AI, because that gives them a strategic advantage in that sort of setting. So definitely responsible AI needs to be front and center for governments and organizations, and a better understanding of the risks that are posed. So it's not just within a country, but also the critical infrastructure. So the banks, the transport networks, the utilities, all of that can be significantly compromised if there is a rogue AI from a certain state actor. So these are some of the challenges that are present at the moment. So coming back to augmented innovation, so two parts to that. Firstly is that the R&D function. So we have all the staff trying to use AI to innovate their current responsibilities in the organization. And the second one is based on agents. So it's still early days, but of the recent released 401, there's the notion of an agent framework. So the agent has some of the higher order cognition I mentioned earlier, so memory, reasoning, and obviously the standard GenAI capabilities. And the agent, to some extent, can perform all the different functions of the organization. So we try to bring the narrow AI or the old-fashioned AI and the GenAI together. So the agents can learn from your data warehouse or data lake and perform their generative AI functions a lot more effectively and precisely. That's across the board for knowledge work. More specifically for certain industries, there's lots of potential that remains untapped that brings the hybrid versions, so GenAI and narrow AI or symbolic AI together to create different products and services that have not been thought about until now. So two sort of hyped up words are AI first and AI native. So AI native companies are born with AI front and center, and they use AI across the board, so across the value chain, from product design or service design to customization to delivery. So we speak about, or we have been talking about hyper-personalization. It hasn't really arrived yet, so potentially that's another area where online retail can be transformed with a lot of hyper-personalization. So even visiting a website is the website content is personalized to suit how you look for information versus having to scroll down, up and down. So for example, if you're booking a holiday, I would want to see the reviews first rather than the photos. So, and the AI potentially knows this and understands how you want to see information presented to you. And this leads to a sort of a personal AI assistant in our smartphones. There is a good transition from large AI to small AI. So what's happening is we use the large models, so GPT, Claude, Gemini, to train small AI. So there's a teacher-student approach where large models are used to reduce the memory footprint and the processing footprint of what's called a quantized or small AI model. And that can fit into your smartphone. And that starts to learn, with the right guardrails, checks and balances, your preferences when you're using the internet or using different apps on the phone. And at some point, we'll have my AI talks to your AI, and they have their own conversation.
Yes.
So it's not just B2C, but also C2C or individual to individual. And if it's figuring out times for meetings, that's all done virtually using different AI agents. So lots of opportunities in that augmented innovation space.
It's a super exciting space, but it's also, I heard a recent conversation around the death of the internet, because it's going to be bots talking to bots. And it's a super interesting concept that I'm very much looking forward to looking into a little bit more in the coming years as well. And as we kind of come to the end of our conversation, I want to I do this with all the guests, is get our crystal balls out and see if we can predict what the future holds for us. From your perspective, Babak, talk us through what you think we're going to see in the next couple of years. Are we going to have robots roaming the earth? What can we expect?
Yeah, very interesting question.
Tough question.
It's a tough question. I think when I think about AI, when I look at the macro perspective, AI will help us to go under oceans. It will help us to go to the space. It will be a good representative of humans. If we want to send shuttles to other galaxies and planets, it can help us understand these type of areas that probably is not very accessible and reachable for humans. But when you think about our normal everyday interactions and social life, it is going to make our life easier. And that is when the problem starts. Because by default, humans, you like ease and comfort. With that comes, the question is, does it comes intelligence or not? Does it make us more intelligent beings or less? And that's number one concern that I have. And number two is control and power. I think power is being shifted from governments to individuals, from governments to organizations. So in the next few years or decades, we'll see that some of those organizations probably will be more powerful than governments. And they will have everything about you. They know everything. So people post everything on the internet, on social media, not knowing every text we send, every photo we share, every word you use is going to be used to train AI. AI systems are hungry for data right now. If you compare where OpenAI is, Claude and other GenAI systems are today and last year, they're a lot more similar today, because they are now almost consuming all the data that's available publicly. You may have heard that this and that organization get to use personal information without your consent, because AI is very data hungry. So I think when I think about that, about things, yes, there's a lot of opportunities, innovation. We love, being ease of use of services, having things customized for us and make life easier, 4 days a week working, 3 days a week. And then you ask, why do we need human to work? And then if agents are going to interact. So then I sometimes, speculate in my head, will one day AI ask, why do we need human? And that is something that, that's why we have people like Elon Musk warning about that, and that this could be more dangerous than nuclear wars.
Funnily enough, he's actually sitting right behind you.
So, and when I think about that, you don't want to focus too much on the dark side, because with technology over time, I like to think that humans learn. We adjust our behavior. We adjust our lifestyle on that basis when we see a big risk. So in my view, we need to have a lot of focus on AI literacy. It needs to start from kids, from childcare, all the way up to universities, to education organizations, to the governments. Question is, do we have our senior leaders in organizations educated enough? Our politicians, are they educated enough? Everyone knows about AI and GenAI. So I think that education is something that I feel like we need to take very seriously, and that will guide our investment, our behavior, and everything else.
Yeah, fantastic. Niloufer.
Thank you. Yeah, great question. So rather than talking about the future of AI, I might just talk about the future of AI regulation. And something that I write about, and I think is sort of future-centric, is embedding regulation into AI technology. And I call it regulation by design in my writings. And we've heard of privacy by design. This is regulation or compliance by design. And the idea is that we implement, as part of our AI design systems, regulation into the actual operation of systems. And this is an interdisciplinary exercise. So for me, the future of technology law is not just about lawyers. It's about computer scientists, software engineers, business analysts, because we need that holistic interdisciplinary approach to make sure that the regulation is embedded in technology. So if I can use an example. So at the moment, we might have say chat boxes giving consumer advice. And this could be misleading advice under the Consumer Protection Act, because without human oversight, there can be sort of areas which are not quite accurate. So if we have something which in the training data sets where we have some sort of vetting and some sort of, and again, I'm talking rather in general terms, not being a technical person, but I know my computer scientists and data analytics colleagues, and at Data Horizons, that's what we do. We do interdisciplinary research, can actually design it so that we have inbuilt mechanisms, because as I mentioned, the systems are opaque, the uses are ubiquitous. So the days of a law enforcer, a regulatory body sitting outside the technology, monitoring and testing it, I think are over. We just don't have the resources, we don't have the capability. So it has to start in the design phase. So at the moment we have the design testing phase, and then once the deployment happens, that's when the law kicks in. And for me, the future is that is not where the law will kick in. The law will kick in at the design phase, and you'll have design embedded in. So for me, I think that's the way to go, and I don't see much talk. So, that's just like my little idea, and it may come to nothing. But it's like what I think is a one way forward in a very complex and evolving landscape.
Well, I think you've got two people that agree with you at this table.
Oh,
so you've got at least
see.
two people backing you up there. And Daswin, look, you're lucky last on what the future holds. But I mean, I would love to know, is it going to look like what we see in the sci-fi movies? Is that what we can expect? Is it going to look like Her? Is it going to look like the AI movie that we've all seen? So what do you expect, Daswin?
I'll start with design, regulation by design. That's actually a really good concept and principle to start with. I think one of the challenges there is that foundational models are non-deterministic. So the downstream applications of foundational models, so for example, when they built ChatGPT, I don't think they planned for it to be so effective at plagiarism with university students. But it was, and that was a significant challenge for all universities across the world. So the downstream effect is the main challenge there, because it's non-deterministic. But there's still a silver lining in what we call hallucinations, because as long as the models hallucinate, there's always human oversight implicit there. So it's mandatory to have human oversight before we take action of any output that a GenAI model produces. It's a thin silver lining, though, because it's probably going to get broken at some point. But also, if you look at the frontier of AI research, there's efforts to build more symbolic AI. So the reason for the hallucination is how it learns is from billions of data points. So if you ask some of the opponents of GenAI, they say if you have a billion points of lower quality data, they use better words, I won't say that, then you can pull out a unicorn from this. And then that's what's happening. So you pump it up with billions and billions of data points, and then there's some emergent capabilities. So, and that's the reason for the hallucinations, because it's trying to draw patterns across different data points. And what's missing there is a model of the physical world, and that's how we learn. So from K-12, we understand objects as they are in the physical environment, and then we draw knowledge out of this. So what the AI has done is, or GenAI, is this knowledge is encoded in text, and it's learned the text. So it has no physical experience, real-world experience. So symbolic AI tries to address this, and that's where, if you've seen the recent release of Optimus robots, they seem impressive. So there is a new field of study, cognitive robotics, where using all sorts of sensors, we're trying to understand the physical world better, and then hook that up with GenAI, so that there's even early versions of a self-driving car that's actually creating a script of the drive. So I'm turning left, I'm turning right, and there's obstacles. So that's the LLM coming into describing what the car is experiencing in the real world. So that's one frontier. We have cognitive robotics, and there's some commentary on I want AI to clean my house, not so much do my work. And that's a very difficult barrier to crack through, because these precise physical movements, robotics is still not there. But there is lots of research happening in that space. So that's one frontier. And if I wear my futurist hat, obviously space exploration. So if you had to colonize Mars, then Musk is leading the way, catching rockets, falling rockets. So that's one. And also in drug discovery. So that's precise, really good AI. And there's not many players in that space, because it's very complicated. Where a cure for cancer, potentially a cure for aging, and all sorts of different medical innovations, and even climate change, slightly far-fetched, but carbon capture, if you can develop in the model itself new molecules or new proteins to capture carbon from the atmosphere, and then produce that en masse, we have potential solutions for the largest challenges that humanity is facing. And also in terms of how the approach to make GenAI more friendly across the world is potentially to treat data as an asset. So where I provide my data. So one challenge there is model collapse, where we have at some point we'll hit the point where there is more AI-generated data than actual natural data, organic data, and at that point we'll have the models training on sort of content they've created in the past version or past iteration. So model collapse is a real threat that's coming up. At that point there'll be serious considerations for treating data as an asset, where I have ownership of my data. At the moment we don't. Ownership, commodify that data and trade it in a potential open market. And if it gets really if the AI gets really smart, so things like AGI, then we have agents doing everything for us. So we trade our data for what the experts are calling universal basic income. That was really pure sci-fi maybe 10 years ago, but it's becoming commonplace mainstream discussion now, because it's heading in that direction in some ways.
It's so much potential, and I guess I'm just so excited to see what the future holds, and thank you for putting on your futurist hats to predict what we'll be able to see. And thank you for also bringing your insights and your knowledge. You're all walking encyclopedias to me. So I want to say thank you so much for coming in today and joining us on the Common Factor series, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you.
Thank you.